Adam, thank you. We'll now bring in Dr. Bren Carlill, who's the Director of Public Affairs for the Zionist Federation of Australia. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Carlill. What brought us to where we are today from the Zionist perspective? In the throes of another war, a long and difficult war ahead, according to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Well, there's the big picture, then there's the immediate cause of this attack. I might add that it has been very difficult over the last 24 hours to watch the level of depravity of these attacks, of women and children being tortured, having their bodies dragged through the streets and so on. The wider issue, though, is Hamas sees itself as in a endless religious war against Israel. It is not about the occupation. It is not about the establishment of a Palestinian state. It is about the destruction of Israel. It's in Hamas's constitution. It's in the statements of their leaders and so on and so forth. And that's the wider reason for this violence. It's the reason the violence breaks out every 3 or 4 years. Nothing as intense or as grotesque as what we've seen over the last day, but it's the reason for the ongoing violence. And the proximate cause is as your conversation was just in the last couple of minutes, starting to talk about Hezbollah, you started to talk about Iran. The whispers over the past several weeks of Saudi-Israeli normalization has grown louder and louder, and it's now a chorus. But Saudi Arabia is the home of the true holy mosques. It is the heart of Islam. And for those organizations like Hamas, like Iran, like Hezbollah, that see themselves in an eternal Islamist war against the Jews, against Israel, the idea of a Saudi-Israeli normalization is anathema. And that is the proximate reason, in my opinion, that this violence has started, yes, to bloody Israel's nose, but to rally the forces, the Islamist forces against the Jews. That's why this is happening now.
Well, from that perspective, let's go to the Zionist movement. What are your overarching aims in all of this? What would you like to see happen?
I would like to see the violence ended, and I would like to see Israeli captives returned to Israel. I would like to see Hamas and the Palestinian movement more generally accept Israel's right to exist and negotiate a peaceful two-state outcome.
Could I ask Bren, what the reaction has been like from your friends and family inside Israel? Could you give us a sense of the shock that this has been received in Israel?
The emotions range from horror to anger to terror. Friends of mine spent many hours in bomb shelters. I have a friend who said, she's been explaining to strangers online for 20 years about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but she is unable to explain to her 3 kids under the age of 10 why they were hiding in bomb shelters. It's an appalling time. And beyond that is the fear of these dozens of Israelis who are now missing. People don't know if they are dead or if they've been taken captive. Everyone is horror-struck. They are worried and they are angry. They are angry at the government and the intelligence failure that led to this. They are obviously angry at Hamas, and they are angry at the enablers of Hamas around the world.
At this moment, it stands that at least 250 Israelis have been killed, over 1,590 have been wounded, 230 Palestinians killed in Gaza, over 1,700 wounded from Israeli strikes. What does the Zionist Federation make of the timing of this attack, which is particularly sensitive, given that it's on a Jewish holiday?
Yeah, it's a completely cynical move from in terms of military strategy. It's very wise on a Jewish religious holiday to attack not only religious holiday but also the Sabbath to attack. It gains an immediate advantage, and Israel has been caught by surprise, and we've seen that. Your conversation talked about the absence of warning and the absence of soldiers to protect the border there. But I think what we're seeing, I mean, people are making parallels to the Yom Kippur War. 2 days ago was the 50th anniversary of the outbreak of that war. Likewise, on a religious day, likewise, Israel was taken by surprise. But within 2 weeks, Israel had turned around that war from being really on the back foot, almost on its knees in some places, to completely surrounding the Egyptian Third Army and being on the road to Cairo. There is no doubt at all that Israel will prevail militarily over in this situation. Hamas leaders, Hamas infrastructure will be killed and destroyed. But it has to be admitted the political win, the social media win of Hamas, displaying in all of their depravity, their rejoicement over the death and the degradation of civilians, will be a win for the Hamas movement going forward.
Bren, what do you think the political consequences will be in Israel for Benjamin Netanyahu, who clearly did not predict this? Do you think it will strengthen or weaken his position?
I think immediately Israelis are rallying around the flag, as you would expect. The focus is on ending the immediate threat to Israeli civilians and bringing home the captives. Once the dust has settled, there will be political recriminations. I wouldn't be surprised if ultimately the government falls over this. That said, the situation in Israel, which is really the situation around the world politically, is that while the balance between, say, left and right isn't particularly growing, the intensity of people's positions on the left and right have been intensifying. So it's quite possible that people on the Israeli right who support the government will be even more convinced that people like Benjamin Netanyahu and his coalition partners should be in power, and people who oppose him will be even more convinced that they should be out of power. So it's obviously very difficult to know politically what will happen in the next 3 weeks, the next 3 months, and so forth. But certainly there is going to be an investigation. Careers will end, and it's quite possible that among those careers will be political careers.
Mr. Carlill, I'd just like to ask how the Zionist Federation would respond to a guest we had on in the last hour, the president of the Australian Palestine Advocacy Network, who says that the occupation is violence and Israel isn't defending itself. It's been waging war on Palestinians each and every day for decades. How would you respond to that?
Well, given what we have seen in the last 24 hours, I think that's completely insensitive, but more broadly, it's completely wrong. We have seen that this is not about the occupation. The Israeli occupation of the Gaza Strip ended 18 years ago. Palestinians in the West Bank have been offered a state in 1967, in 1978, in 2000, 2001, 2008, 2014. Their leaders keep saying no to offers of statehood and to an end to the occupation. This is not about the occupation. The people that are committing these acts of terror are not trying to carve out Palestinian independence. They are trying to end Israel. Look at the statements of their spokespeople. They are in a genocidal war, not against Israelis, but against Jews. That's what this conflict is about.
And I was going to say, it's important to note that they don't represent all Palestinians either. This hasn't spilled into the West Bank in any great
Well, they don't represent all Palestinians, but the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research, it's a Palestinian polling organization. It's based in Ramallah. They do polls every 3 months. One of the questions that they regularly ask Palestinians of Gaza, the West Bank and Jerusalem is, do you support armed attacks against Israeli civilians inside the Green Lines? In other words, not settlers, not soldiers, but Israeli civilians in Israeli cities like Tel Aviv. Now, in the latest poll in September last month, 57% of Palestinians did support terrorist attacks against Israeli civilians. Now, I've been looking at these polls for many years. The average yes result for that question is 48%. So no, Hamas don't represent all Palestinians, but the reality is the majority of Palestinians support terrorism against Israel. And we can see that in the mass celebrations, the handing out of sweets and baked goods in Palestinian cities across the West Bank whenever an Israeli civilian is killed, much less the situation that we've seen in the last 24 hours.
And just finally, does the Zionist Federation of Australia condone any attacks against Palestinians, retaliatory or other?
No attacks against civilians that target civilians is ever legitimate. And any Israeli civilians that would do that, we have condemned in the past, and we will again. The Israeli army does not target Palestinian civilians. It does target Palestinian combatants, and we fully support and defend Israel's right to defend itself, indeed Israel's obligation to defend itself. Now, the reality is, as we've seen, because of the nature of Hamas tactics, Palestinian civilians will be killed. The fact that Hamas has taken Israeli captives into Gaza, it seems inevitable that Israeli troops will have to go into Gaza in order to get them. This will result in Israeli troop deaths. It will result in Hamas operatives dying, and tragically, it will also result in Palestinian civilians in Gaza dying. This is a terrible situation, and the fault lies entirely with Hamas.
We thank you very much for your time, Dr. Bren Carlill, the Director of Public Affairs for the Zionist Federation of Australia.